Let's talk property, and as Perth reaches its peak, we explore the shifting landscape of Australia's real estate market and the emerging trends set to take the spotlight. Joining me here at the desk, Tim Graham from Hotspotting, the host of the Property Playbook. Great to see you, sir. Perth, what's going on?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me again, Aaron. Perth is, we're seeing a change of the guard. Obviously, have been some really strong growth there over the last couple of years, but we have a proprietary formula at Hotspotting called the Price Predictor Index, and the simple premise of that is that we monitor sales volumes, and we sort of say that if you see rising sales activity in a market, price growth tends to follow, but at the opposite end, if we see declining sales activity, we often see prices soften, and that's what we're seeing in Perth right now.
Why was Perth doing so well? Let's start there.
Well, I think they had a really proactive state government, I think. They were open to investors. We had many years of not much price growth as well, so it was coming from a low point. I think affordability had a big part in that. But yeah, when you've got a proactive government that's happy to see some investment, that's what happens.
And so what's gone wrong?
Well, we've probably reached a peak there in terms of how much they could, the incomes they could afford in terms of price growth. I think we've also seen, because of that price growth, yields have started to drop away a little bit, but we're also starting to see other markets that are starting to rise, which is showing that it's a bit more affordable in those markets now. And as we know, all markets are cyclical, so it's gone through its cycle. We believe it started to peak, and now some other markets that were at the lower end of the cycle, they're starting to show better opportunities.
Western Australia is always a bit of an outlier, isn't it, when it comes to property? It doesn't do what the eastern states are doing. Yeah. Is that solely because of the mining and the minerals?
No, look, it's a lot more diverse than it used to be. Obviously, they've got really close connection to Asia as well, so you've got really good lifestyle aspects as well. I think it's always been known as that mining and the minerals boom, but yeah, it's a lot more diverse than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago.
So now with the peak behind us, talk to us about which markets are actually emerging as the leaders. Who takes over?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. So we release our Price Predictor Index every quarter. We monitor every single Australian suburb, and we basically give it a classification. Right now there are what we would say 14 jurisdictions, 8 capital cities, 6 regional markets, and out of all of that analysis, basically there was 8 winners, so 8 locations with positive rankings or at least steady rankings. There were 5 steady markets, which basically means that they were just maintaining consistency, but then there was only 1 loser, Perth being the loser. So we saw a slow drop off in sales activity over the last 12 months, whereas we've got markets like Melbourne right now, which are actually surprising us. We had 63% of suburbs here in Melbourne actually showing positive rankings.
Why is that? Because watching the news, the Victorian economy is in a lot of difficulty. Businesses going backwards, a lot of businesses closing. Is it because the fundamentals of Melbourne are solid? There's population growth. Yeah. There are suburbs people want to live in. People will move states to live in.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, we've got, I think sentiment's having a really good play here in Melbourne for the last couple of years. It's obviously been hit pretty hard post-COVID. We did have a really big boom, and as I say, all markets are cyclical, so we have seen a correction here in the Melbourne market, and I suppose it's relatively affordable when you start to look at Sydney and Brisbane markets now.
Sydney, really interesting one, because that's obviously still a notch above Melbourne. Do you see that changing, given that Melbourne's population has now overtaken Sydney in terms of the metropolitan population? Do you see Melbourne getting to a point, and if you do, over what period of time?
Well, they're very different markets. I think Sydney's a bit more landlocked. We've got the ability to sort of go out and up here in Melbourne. Yeah. But I think, as I said, coming from a very low point here in the cycle with Melbourne, that it's looking very affordable. I think everybody knows that Melbourne will have better days ahead of it. So we're starting to see, certainly, anecdotally, we're seeing a lot of action coming back into Victoria in investment because of that affordability factor, where people were leaving in droves because of land tax, higher stamp duty, 130 different legislative changes when it comes to rental management. So the Victorian government was really saying, we don't want your money, investors, and they were finding somewhere else to put it.
There's also the lockdowns, and a lot of people either fled the state or fled the city for the country. Yeah. Is it having an impact that now people are heading back to the city? We're seeing return to work mentality as well, and rules there as well. Yeah. Is the city picking up and the country's going down? How's it
Not necessarily.
Working?
I think COVID gets blamed or is the reason why people were leaving the capital cities and moving to the regions, but we don't believe that was necessarily the case. We call it the exodus to affordability, and it was happening well before COVID. So people were choosing that lifestyle aspect and the affordability, selling up the country, the capital city lifestyle, probably downsizing in terms of mortgage, but not necessarily downsizing in terms of home. So they're actually getting a larger home, putting some money into the bank, and also probably having enough room for a boat in the backyard.
And then there's infrastructure as well, obviously, and Victoria's been spending a lot of money on infrastructure too. Some of those projects, like the North East Link, they will take time to complete. But the Westgate Tunnel project, that will be open, we are told, fingers crossed, by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Will that have a material impact, do you think, on house prices in the West? Because I've spoken to a lot of businesses for 20 years who said we'd love to invest in the West, but we can't invest in a place that has one road in and out. And as we know, one accident, goodbye road.
Yeah, that's right.
And for a lot of people, that's a reason why they haven't moved to the West. The Westgate Tunnel gives us another, I guess, river crossing. Is that going to change things, do you think, for property prices in Victoria?
Yeah, well, look, I think if we think about the east and west in Victoria, there's a huge difference in terms of price points. So I think while we're in that high interest rate environment outside of the infrastructure, it's still going to be seen as affordable and money will naturally flow that way. But in terms of whether or not that east-west link is going to be the game changer, I don't think it is.
Interesting. Now, that you mentioned the R word, I've got to jump on there, but there's two R words we're looking at the moment. Rates and possible global recession brought on by Trump's tariffs. One could lead to the other, being that interest rate cuts could now be in sight for the RBA. They would have no idea what's going on at the moment, would they? Because there are so many different things. International, potentially change of government, by the looks of the polls, won't be a change of government. Where does the RBA go? What should homeowners be looking for, and what's the impact on house prices?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Aaron, because I think the RBA thinks that the only lever that they've got to pull in terms of inflation things has always been on that interest rate, and they think that the only thing that's going to affect real estate prices is whether interest rates are going up and down. But our biggest problem here in Australia has nothing to do with interest rates. It's about the lack of housing, and there's so many other factors that are driving prices up, and it's because if you saw between 2013 and 2023, we had this huge boom in population. At the same time, our listings dropped and our rentals dropped. So as our population has gone up, we've got less houses for those people. So
and governments have been talking about building hundreds of thousands of new houses, but they haven't been built.
No, that's right.
A lot of tradies, a lot of builders say it's impossible to get tradies, and they're actually competing against the government, who've got 10,000 tradies on these big projects.
That's right.
When they come to an end at the end of the year, do you think that might make it a bit easier? Or are there still concerns about government red tape restrictions, because it seems like a lot of developers aren't touching Melbourne?
Well, they're not. They just can't make the project stack up. So they're doing their feesos and they're saying, listen, this isn't going to work. And I think those, the costs of the trades is huge because they're so used to that big lick of income coming out of those construction jobs from government, and they're not able to go back to those residential wages. So I think it's a big issue.
The end of the year is going to be an interesting time, isn't it, for the Victorian government and for a lot of the people who have moved to Victoria for these projects. I wasn't aware that there was such a massive difference, I suppose, between what the government pays for infrastructure and what the private sector pays to build houses. Yeah,
well, state by state, I mean, Queensland's in a challenge at the moment where it's not because they can't get the projects to stack up, it's that they can't get the trades because all the trades are going to these big commercial projects, government-backed infrastructure projects.
What's your outlook for the next few years when it comes to housing affordability, but also these projects to get things up and running? Because we are seeing the Victorian government promising stamp duty if you go to build a townhouse, for example. What are your views on all that?
Well, I kind of feel like it's a false economy. They're trying to give the investor or the home buyer a discount on the stamp duty, but if they're only on one-part contracts, which is higher density, as you say, could be a townhouse, but a lot of these higher density projects, if the developer can't get that off the ground, then the person can't buy it as to get that stamp duty discount in the first place. So they really should be giving the discount to the developer on the stamp duty, because every time they start a project, they create lots more stamp duty, but the government's a bit short-sighted in that.
It's funny, isn't it? It's kind of the unintended consequences of a decision that then the market works out and will tell you whether or not the policy works. Tim, Graham, always appreciate your time, of course, and you can catch the program anytime of the Property Playbook right here on Ticker. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.